Welcome again to today's session, to the introduction of systems innovation. This is the first event of a series of events that we call the SI Learning Series. So yes, this is going to be the first event of the SI Learning Series, which is going to be a 5-month learning journey that we're going to guide you through the materials and the main ideas that we have here in the Systems Innovation Network. So my name is Yasmin, and alongside my colleague Josh Colchester, we're going to host and facilitate not just today's session, but all the other events that are going to happen during this 5-month learning series. This is hosting by the SI London Hub, and we are very, very happy to have you here. So before we start with this first session, I would like to give an overview of how the SI Learning Series is going to happen for the ones who are not familiar with what that is. Yes, so as I said, this is the first event of the 5-month learning series that we've organized for you, which we're going to cover the 5 main modules that we have in the SI methodology to doing systems change in 4 main ways. First, we're going to start with the introduction, which is an overview of the main ideas that we have inside each one of these modules. After that, we're going to cover the tools, which is going to support the understanding of these ideas and topics that we covered in the introduction. After that, we're going to present you case studies or real life experiences that people in the real world are working with. And it's going to be important to have their feedback on the practical experience of using these tools and ideas. And lastly, we're going to cover challenges, where you're going to use all the ideas presented in the previous sessions to make sense in a practical way of a specific challenge that we're going to cover here. It's going to be a different one each time, so it's to be diverse and to understand the different ways that we can use these tools and ideas. We are going to have every Wednesday, each session is going to happen every Wednesday at 5 p.m. UK time. And a good part of this learning series that you can choose depending on your expertise and your needs and the way that you want to organize yourself, how you want to follow us in this learning series. Okay, so without further ado, I'm going to start with today's session. But if you want to read a bit more about the learning series, I have the link here, and you can access and read the article with more details so you can understand how it works and follow on the other sessions as well. Okay, good. So we can get started on our first session, and this is going to be an hour session, 60 minutes. This is being recorded, and we're going to put on our YouTube channel afterwards, so you can access that. We are going to have a Q&A moment where you can ask questions and comments, and we are more than happy to address them. And we are going to show you the next session that we're going to have. Okay. Today we're covering the guides that we call the Introduction to Systems Innovation, and you can find that on our website under tools. And I want to hear from you. What do you hope to learn from this session? So if you can put the stickies here, you can use the left sidebar and you can choose the stickies. You can just click on the sticky and put here. What do you want to learn? What do you hope to learn? Okay. Going to give you 2 minutes, and then we can get started on the theories. If you have any questions as well, you can use the chat. Let me see if you... Okay, any questions so far, Josh?
No, is everybody able to access Miro? Just wanted to check everybody knows how to use Miro to create a sticky. You can't access it. Tara, have you tried that link I just posted now? The earlier one there was an issue with, the one above. Have you tried it? Okay. You might have to refresh, Tara. It should be working. How can we, do you want to show stickies again, Yasmin?
Yes. Yes, so here on the left sidebar, you have some options and you can choose the sticky here. There's one right here, sticky note. You just click on it and place your mouse where you want it to be.
Yeah, should we jump in and take a look whilst people are posting up?
Yes. Okay, so we have build knowledge on systems thinking and apply in the real world. Okay. Improve my understanding on systems innovation, ideally applied to organizations. How to apply systems change within the public sector. Begin to understand what I don't know. That's a great way to start. Learn the main concepts of systems thinking. Reinforce past learnings. Great. Connect with the SI network, introduction to basic concepts of systems innovation. The right place. Apply to our industry, fundamental principles and process. Awesome. Yes, as I said, this is going to be an introduction to systems innovation. And of course, in terms of more ideas on how to apply and to use the tools, then we're going to have the other sessions that are going to cover in more details this part. Okay. So I think we can start, and I'll give it over to you, Joss.
Great, thank you, Yasmin. Maybe I'll grab the screen quickly to, or yeah, do you want to navigate over to the top left there? So great to see everyone. Thank you all for joining, and looking forward to discussing systems innovation with you. It's just a short hour, so we want to talk about some of the kind of foundational ideas. As mentioned, it's the content in the guide you'll find on the left there, so you'll be able to jump into more of it afterwards, more details. Do you want to start with this question, Yasmin, or do you want to start with the presentation? Yeah, okay. Do you know what a wicked challenge is? Yeah, this is where we're going to start. The challenges out there in the world, and the idea that they're, well, many of them have been, but are increasingly becoming very complex. And we're going to start there, but I'd love to hear from you people. What have you heard of this idea, wicked challenge or wicked problem? I'm not a fan of the word problem, so I call them challenges. Have you heard of that idea? Do you know what it's about? Post a sticky up, please. Never heard of it, or yes, I have a vague idea, or I think it's this, or I think it's that. Let's just take 60 seconds to get some ideas. You could raise your hand also if you want, or unmute yourself. Give us a quick intro to wicked problems. Okay, it's a complex problem to solve. Yes, complexity is certainly part of it. Adaptive challenge, yeah, evolving. It's not they're not fixed in nature. Okay, poverty, for example. Yes. Interrelated, non-linear, an intractable problem or challenge. Yes. Okay, maybe we'll stay collecting your. Did someone want to speak?
No.
No. Okay, great. Maybe we'll stay collecting your ideas there. Yes, someone has a detailed description down here, a graphic. It means different to. It means different to schools of thought. Okay, multiple factors involved. All right. Let's stay going then. Maybe we'll come back to these afterwards. So this is a graphic made at SI recently, maybe a couple of months ago, and I think it's an interesting place to start the whole discussion and start the journey. There's many ways of presenting this whole area of systems innovation, systems change, and people come at it from many different angles. But I think it's interesting to start with the question of what's going on out there in the world and this idea of wicked problems. So maybe you've heard of the iceberg model. We're going to cover that in future sections in about a month or so. But this is kind of alluding to that. We see the waterline there and something above the waterline and lots of stuff going on beneath it. But maybe we zoom in a little bit to what's going on above the waterline there, right? So that's that one node, and that's a problem, we might say. Could have many forms. Could be climate change. Could be homelessness in your city, right? That's a problem, people would say. It could be, what else would be a good example of this? Too many children dropping out of school before they finish it. It could be the water crisis in wherever it is, California, should we say. And normally, the kind of approach we take, when we say problems, there's another word that goes along with that. And that starts with an S, and we call it solutions. Okay, medical debt in the United States. That's a good example. Yes, it's a problem. And we normally start talking about solutions. How can we have a solution to this problem of medical debt in the United States? And that there already is actually a framing of the whole. Maybe we can move up just slightly or zoom out slightly. That's the framing of the whole kind of challenge. The whole situation already is being framed there in terms of a problem that is a thing and a solution that's going to fix that thing. And that kind of has a powerful logic for us as human beings. But it's a very linear way of thinking. And it actually, that whole logic depends upon this problem being relatively simple, not being complex. When in fact, things like medical debt in the United States or children dropping out of university or whatever it is, someone said poverty, the business cycle, financial crisis also, these are wicked problems. Well, what happens is when you go and pull on that problem and what you think is a problem, you go and try and address it and tackle it, and you do so, but actually what you find is that it's not a single thing. It's actually connected and interrelated. Actually, that bit there going down the rabbit hole, right? You start seeing this thing is connected to other things, and those other things are connected to those other things. So if you are sensitive and aware and really interested in addressing these kind of wicked problems, you start to see this unfolding complexity emerge behind that issue. Because the issue is actually not a really thing in itself. It's an emergent phenomena of a whole pile of complexity that goes on underneath the hood, right? Climate change, you might think it's just a single thing. There's, carbon, we've got to get rid of that. But when you dig into it, you actually find that's interrelated to a whole pile of things, right? We know global politics is a massive part of it. Why are we struggling so much? Partly to do with politics. It's partly to do with business and finance. It's partly to do with technology. It's partly to do with many, many different things. And that's what we're talking about here. How do we move away from this problem solution linear framing to these wicked problems and assuming that they're kind of simple in some respect, and start to really dig into that complexity and recognize it and say, wait a sec, this is what it's about. How do we address that complexity down at the bottom of the iceberg and start working with that and trying to change it? Because that's the system out of which this issue is emerging. And then we're going to ask about how do we change that system so that this problem does not emerge, or emerges there's a different emergent outcome, and that problem is dissolved. It's not solved. It starts to dissolve.
Good. Yes, and as mentioned, we can understand the wicked problems as emergent phenomena, right, of this underlying structure and the connections amongst the elements that are underneath the iceberg. And we normally see that as a more complex than the problems that we have daily. For example, if there's a problem with your car, you can identify that problem and you can separate a part of it, and then fix that part and put it back to the system, right? And this is a relatively more simple problem than the actual wicked problems that we face in society, as people said, poverty or climate change, or social issues and health issues like obesity. And we normally use the same perspective and the same tools to these tame problems, to these more simple problems, to address the wicked challenges, right? And that's where we could be doing differently.
Yeah, maybe that's where the problem arises. Some people say, these wicked problems, they're about kind of our mismatch between our understanding of the world and our approach to it and the nature of the system we're dealing with. If we really started to better understand complex systems and how they work and start to work with that complexity, then the way forward would become much more apparent to us, rather than the kind of scenario we often find ourselves in, where we're kind of blocked and stuck and these problems seem overwhelming, because behind them are these very, very complex systems. And it's really incumbent upon us to start to embrace that complexity instead of adopting mental models and frameworks that really kind of exclude and push out all that complexity, and look for kind of planned solutions to these problems. If we're really serious about some of these issues here, inequality is a good one. That's not a single thing. There's no kind of tax package that's going to solve that. It's actually interrelated with many other things. And the health crisis, obesity mentioned, water crisis is an interesting one. It looks like just a lack of water, but there's a water crisis in different parts of the world, northern India, Cape Town, California. And if you go to those places and start to dig into what's going on, you'll see it's interrelated with many other systems, politics and finance and technology and so forth. So we're asking about how do we really embrace that, and how do we start to work with that to not try and fix the problem, but actually change that system, change the way those parts are interrelated and the kind of outcomes this system is achieving. And that's what we call systems change, or systems innovation, trying to change the whole system so that we get the emergence of a different outcome. We get a healthier system in some sense. And that's that. Did someone have their hand up there, or was that, no, we'll stay going.
Yeah, so now that you've understood a bit more what wicked problems are, post up your stickies here and identify 2 wicked problems that you are involved in your daily life. Can be
because we actually are part of perpetuating these in our everyday lives, aren't we? Right now, we're using technology that's burning using electricity and burning, oil and fossil fuels and so forth.
So we have 60 seconds as well. We'll read some of those. Okay, so what do we have here? Gender equality, third one. Poverty and income disparity. Inequality, education system. We're integrating former terrorists into society. Wow. Sustainable and affordable food systems.
Maybe I'll quickly pick up on that. Well, that's a really interesting one. Terrorism and international criminal networks are such good examples. The criminal networks have grown massively with the advent of globalization technology over the past few decades, and there's this constant interaction between the security forces trying to catch them and them adapting and evolving and so forth. It's a constantly evolving problem that someone had at the beginning there around adaptation. So it's an interesting one.
Yes, we have here in the chat, war in Ukraine. No mindset for cooperation of multiple sectors. Yes, some good ones. Technology and security, big one.
Yeah, you think about cyber, international cybersecurity. That's an interesting one. And I guess a lot of it's emerging out of the very open nature of the system it's depending upon, the internet, which is a part of this too. These are very open, kind of complex and messy systems. Well,
Yes.
we can't kind of isolate the problem, if you understand what I mean, like we saw with the car there.
Yeah, so for each one of these problems, we can't, as Josh just said, we can't just separate one part and try to change that part and think that we're going to sort out what's going on, right? Because this is an interconnected and interrelated problem. And that's why a systemic view of the problem is so important, because we can see not just one part of this challenge, but we can see the whole system that is involved, the whole structure and the connections between elements that sometimes we don't really see because we're so focused on just trying to fix this specific problem or putting one product in the market or changing this problem to solve a specific problem. But in reality, this is much bigger than what we normally think it is, right?
Yeah, and it also comes to our kind of framing, doesn't it? Like our way of looking at things, and a lot around incentives too, for like our desire for impact in the world, and our mental capacity to deal with complexity, to deal with open, dynamic, messy, uncertain environments, right? When we have a single thing, one part of the system, we can kind of get our hands around it and it's a tangible thing and we can measure and we can make progress on it. But when we go out to this bigger, messy, complex system, it seems overwhelming in some ways. So that's also part of it. Maybe we scroll down to talk a bit about the need in this context for actual transformation, right? We're not trying to change one part. We're not just trying to improve one part. We're not trying to make it better or develop it within the same logic, within the same paradigm. We're actually trying to change the paradigm. We're trying to change the way that system is organized so that it creates very different outcomes. So this is just an illustration that tree, if it has a certain DNA, a certain logic to it, and we improve that, it's just going to get bigger and so on. It's just going to get a bigger version of that same tree, which is quite often what we're doing when we go into a system, we see a problem, and then we try to change a part, try to change parts in that system. For example, the energy, we talk about an energy transition. But a lot of what we're doing is changing parts in that system. We say, oh, we need new batteries to store electricity. We need new wind turbines, this and that, and so forth. But actually, the logic of the whole thing is often left unchecked. So what we're saying here is, no, actually, if this is a systemic issue, if it's part of the very nature of that system, we need to address that systemic, the kind of DNA of this system, and think about trying to change that so that we get the emergence over time of a very different system.
Yes, and
about,
there's a question. There's a question here in the chat. Well, comment. There's also a team challenge around systems innovation because group thinking might challenge the decision to look at a problem from a systemic view.
Yep. Yep. Sure can.
Good. Okay, so talking about examples. Do you have any examples of this kind of transformational change in an organization, industry, in your life? Let's post up some stickies here. I'm going to have 1 minute for that as well. You can use the chat as well if you prefer. Claudia, the question is, do you have any examples of this kind of transformational change in your own life, in the field of work that you do, industry, organization?
You might think about something like, the change in our political systems that came about here in Europe as we moved into the modern era, how they were dominated by a kind of monarchs and a feudal system, a landed, it's a land-based system where the power came from and so forth. So actually that whole regime changing, right? We eventually moved towards something that was more democratic, that was not as hierarchical and fixed, but it was actually more about the citizens and their contribution in the political system, so that, and the utility of that to the people. So actually it came from a very different place and looked very different, and we know that was a hugely disruptive, transformative, sometimes violent and long-term transformation, and we could actually see that in almost all the systems as we moved into the modern era. So those are examples of kind of transformational change. Yeah, actually that one's a good one. Decrease of smoking in populations in some parts of the world, maybe not all, I'm not sure, but that's interesting because it's also about the change. We're going to talk about paradigms now, right? This idea of mental models, because that's tied into that, isn't it? The way our mental models, our thinking, our perception of smoking has changed hugely in developed economies, and that's actually leading to major shifts in actual behavior and what's happening. Yeah.
Good, yeah. reorientation of global governance system post-World War II, permaculture, zero waste lifestyle, eco-villages, different way of living, change in the food system and move to industrial or agriculture. Good.
Have one in the chat too, I think.
Let's see. A comment, my company is changing its operating model to become more agile and create means for using the potential of its members. Awesome. So yeah, we can continue here. And yes, as mentioned, we need to move from this ecosystems thinking, right, to a more ecosystems thinking, because ultimately the way that we think and the way that we are is the way that we're going to do things in the world, right? So rather than just understanding all these challenges and problems around our own perspective and our own mental models and our own values, the necessary shift is the one that we see ourselves as part of the system. We see ourselves as embedded in all these different challenges and these different systems that we've mentioned before, that you've mentioned before. And this ecosystem way of looking at things, it's very much of a transformational way of looking at the world, right? We shift from just looking at ourselves and our needs to one that it's the needs of all the elements involved in this complex system. So I really like this image because it summarizes in a very good way what we need to do within our own perspective to be able to see the system and to be able to address the challenges in a systemic way. Because now we can see ourselves as part of all these interrelated systems that we are involved in, right?
Yeah, so we're starting to talk about, you know, this aspect of framing the system, and that the way we look at the world and the way we look at these problems is very important to then how we go about addressing them and trying to resolve them in some sense. So maybe we could zoom in a little bit. Maybe if you've heard of these ideas of analytical and holistic thinking, and I'm sure you're aware that, you know, a lot of this stuff is based around systems thinking, which can be characterized in different ways, but we might say it's a slightly more holistic way of looking at the world, or it's really a way of balancing these two different perspectives, this analytical view and this more holistic view. And yeah, I'll say briefly what those are. Analytical view is a way of looking at the world. It's a paradigm that reduces down complexity to the individual parts of that system and tries to understand those parts, and then create an account of the whole as the function of those parts, a summation of those parts. So it's about narrowing down to the problem. What's a specific problem that's going on here? It's a linear way of looking at the world, in terms of, we have a complex phenomena that might be a problem with the healthcare system in your country or wherever it is. And we then go and look for what is the specific problem here. And we look for the immediate causes of that, and we reduce down to that, and we try to fix that. That's an analytical approach that works well when we have simpler problems as before. But actually here, we've kind of touched upon it. We actually need something different, because this is a problem with the system, not the parts. So we actually have to step back, and we have to gain this perspective, but also cultivate and develop this whole capacity in ourselves, in our organizations, in our societies, to actually be more holistic in our thinking, not us modern human beings, and the whole pathway we've traveled down in the modern era with modern science has very much taken us to this kind of analytical approach to solving problems, and that's been very successful, and it's created many great things in our societies, but it's also blinds us in many ways to complexity, and takes us away from this more holistic view that's necessary when we're dealing with very complex problems. And in many ways, we could say this is really core to why we struggle so much with these very wicked problems, because we often come back to this narrow analytical approach, trying to find a silver bullet sort of a solution to them, when really what we need to do is step back and try and look at the whole, and then take an approach from that, take an approach that's actually working with the whole, rather than trying to solve a particular problem there. So that's why the framing is really key to this, because it can take us down the wrong path if we use the wrong framing. That's quite often where we've kind of ended up, following this analytical path, continuing in that way, even though it's not actually appropriate when you're dealing with complex problems. It's very good for simpler ones. So what we're saying, the kind of argument here is that, yeah, we really need this holistic thinking, because if we want to, we've kind of made the argument for, all right, these wicked problems, they're systemic, we need to change the system. But if we want to change the system, that's only going to come from a view of the system, right? Systems innovation, we're going to talk about what that is in a minute now. That can only come from a view of the whole, right? It can never come from just a partial view of one of the parts. And that's why the journey kind of starts here with this holistic way of looking at and trying to cultivate and develop our capacity to see systems instead of just seeing the parts of those systems.
Yes. Well, do you have any questions so far? If you have any questions, then of course you have the chat where you can post some ideas here in the mirror board, but of course you can address them as well if you have. But we are going to address this next question. What do you think are the consequences of becoming over-analytical in our thinking and looking at the world? So we can have 1 minute here as well. And yes, if you have any questions, please, you have the chat, the mirror board, or just unmute yourself.
Næste station, Lunderskov.
Sorry. Don't know if it was a question or maybe not. Okay. All right, let's see what we have here. Key root causes of problem issues. Good. We can never understand the system from its part, but from their interactions. Why should come first to how we do things? Otherwise, we'll keep having fixes that fail, not making real impact. Yes. Developing solutions that cause other problems. A good one, right? The unintended consequences that we can create, that it can emerge from not addressing the root causes of the problem or the challenge. Solutions disconnected one from another. Reductionist approaches can lead us to apply the wrong solution also creating unforeseen consequences. Yes. Great.
It's
You
a
can't-
good one about, solutions disconnected from each other. And in a way, that's kind of the opportunity lost, isn't it? That if there's no kind of systemic view, no broader view, we can't really get a coordination across our efforts, can we? And we're never going to get kind of higher level capacity in the system to really do things on that level, to really address the really complex challenges there. So that's one issue, isn't it? We narrow down to the individual solutions, and we do a lot of recreating the wheel, and we never get that kind of broader, higher level networked collaboration in the system that would lead to the emergence of something really, really new and powerful.
Yeah, exactly. So we can continue.
There's also one in the chat. Oh, there's a question.
Oh, some comments here. The word is addicted. Quick fixes. Okay. So can analytical thinking be useful to analyze the parts of the whole, each of the elements, systems, but not to investigate their functions through their interactions needed?
Yeah. So it's a good point, and I kind of mentioned it there. Maybe if we go back to that graphic before, ultimately what systems thinking is arguing for is a balance between holistic and analytical thinking, because it's ultimately what's needed, right? Of course, we need analytical thinking so as to understand the parts and their internal workings and how they work. Really, that's what it tells us. But then you also need synthetic thinking or holistic thinking to be able to step back and think about how they're interrelated and organized in the best way, and the effects of taking actions, right? People talked about unintended consequences. So yes, you need both, right? A system is its elements and interrelationships between them, and you'll only get a fully functioning system if the elements are working well and the ways they are interrelated are also healthy and working well. So we do need people, and we do need ourselves to understand the parts, to try and improve those parts. But we also need other people, and we need ourselves also to be able to step back and look at the whole and try and think about how that's organized. So ultimately, we're arguing for a balance between the two. We know that analytical thinking has brought a lot of great things, right? If we want a great healthcare system, it's going to be both analytical and holistic, right? It's going to help us understand our molecular makeup so that we can work on that level in our tissues and so forth. But it's also going to be holistic thinking, looking at us in the context of our environment and so forth.
Yes. Yeah, I see Luis has his hands up, but maybe we can continue here with the ideas, and then in the end we can come back with all the questions that you have. Okay. So yes, exactly what you've been talking about, right? We have been doing analytical thinking and analytical ways of doing things for a really long time, and we've seen the potentials and the advantages of doing that in a way, but we forgot to look at the bigger picture. Where are these parts interrelated, and how can we actually bring these ideas that we got from this analytical ideas that we got to create a holistic view of what's going on in the world, right? And that's why we need a systemic innovation rather than just parts innovation.
And we often kind of drown in this over-analytical, over-analysis, analysis paralysis. But if you think about, if you've maybe read these, research and papers on, the energy transition or something, massive amounts of information, you scroll through it and you scroll through it, but you never actually see a bigger picture of how does all this stuff relate? How does this all fit together so that I can see the whole? And I think that's a lot of what people want. They want to be able to synthesize the complexity to see how things are interrelated. And if we can't see that, we're never going to be able to, operate on that level or try and get successful outcomes on that level. So that's part of what we're arguing for. How can we, start to look at the system as a whole in that way and start to understand it on that level? Maybe you've heard about systems mapping. We're going to talk about that in a month or two, as a way to represent, the overall system, even if it's sometimes quite a crude picture of the whole, right? But then, of course, we can go follow on from that for people to input their kind of more detailed descriptions in the different parts, but we still need to see that whole and how things are interrelated. Yeah, so I'll just say a word about this one. So this here is kind of getting to what we're talking about when we say systems innovation. If you're new to that, maybe you're still wondering what does that mean? And that's exactly what we'll be unpacking over the next 4 or 5 months. So we'll have plenty more discussions about it. But this is just a brief intro. So we have a general sense for what innovation is. This is kind of interpreting it quite literally, innovation and systems. So innovation, it's this value-adding process of creating and applying new ideas. So it's the creation of new ideas, and then how do we apply those towards solving problems or resolving issues and creating value through the introduction of new products or services or so forth. And there's different ways of doing that. We're saying there's 2 fundamentally different ways based upon what we've been discussing so far, the analytical approach versus the more holistic approach. And looking on that lower side, we can see the kind of innovation we know a lot about. It's innovation in parts. We are producing individual products or services. So it starts typically with a kind of, it starts with analysis, right? Someone, a scientist or a researcher or whatever, they see a new way to solve a particular problem. That might be a new kind of bioplastic, thinking about the molecular makeup that would make a great bioplastic. And then they take that to market. They put that that's a specific solution to a problem, and they wrap it up in a product or a service, and they take that to the market. And then if they're successful, they attract customers and people into a new way of doing things where they're using bioplastic instead of normal plastic. And that's innovation as usual, we might call it. And it's a lot of, we've seen a lot of that in Silicon Valley and other parts of the world. It's becoming a kind of dominant economic modality in our world. And but we also know it doesn't actually change the system. That's the interesting thing about it. It actually maintains the status quo. So, thin filmed solar panels is an innovation in our energy system that's being developed at this time through obviously a lot of scientific knowledge, and then there's R&D, and then a whole kind of pipeline of taking that to market and commercializing it and so forth. And great, that goes out there and we put our solar panels up, but we know that change in part of the energy system will maintain the status quo. It's not actually challenging the way the system is organized. You could still have a linear grid. You could still have these large centralized actors, the whole thing dominated by a few large actors, the system organized in that traditional way, and that solar panel wouldn't actually challenge it. It wouldn't change the system in any sense. It would maintain it. And that's a lot of what we see around here. So we're asking, is there a different kind of innovation? We're saying that kind of innovation is not going to get us to the place we want to go to when it comes to really making transformation happen. It's incremental and not suffice. We're saying that many of the systems we depend upon in our modern world really need to transform. We actually need to change the system. So we're saying up at the top, there's a different kind of innovation. And it's an innovation where we are thinking from a different place. We're thinking more holistically about the nature of innovation. Here we are. We're taking a more holistic approach. And it's coming from this systems thinking, looking at the world differently and seeing the whole system and having that overview to the whole, and then saying, actually, how can we change that whole system? How can we change the way we're thinking about this system? How can we change the way of organizing this system so that actually it might create a whole new pattern of organization, a whole new way of doing things, whole new way of fulfilling that function that we wanted. If we wanted electricity, if we're taking that example, it's a way of thinking about the system differently and organizing it differently to achieve that outcome that is much better than the one we have at the moment. So that might be, really questioning the architecture of our energy systems. Is this linear grid we've had for 100 years or so, is that really the best way of doing things? Or maybe we should be organizing in a very decentralized way. Maybe, we should be producing our own energy. Maybe we should be trading our own energy, and looking at it very differently in that way. And that applies to all the systems we depend upon, from healthcare to finance to so on and so forth. And that's a very different kind of innovation. It's the innovation we're talking about here, systems innovation.
Yes, and now in 1 minute again, we would like to ask, how can you see one problem in your area of study or work with the systemic lenses? How can you identify something that you're dealing with right now in a different way? How can you see that in a different way? So 1 minute. We have some nice images here. Let's have some of those involving all possible stakeholders at the onset, considering all the components that lead to that, not just the collection agency practices. I like to look at problems through at least 3 layers: physical, logical, and persona. That's an interesting one. Bringing a multi-level stakeholders to the process. It's bringing people together, different views, right, together. Solving a problem through systemic approaches makes it easy to solve other connected problems. Good. Yes. Yeah, you can continue posting some ideas here, but it's exactly what you mentioned, right? Bringing people together, bringing different perspectives and different ideas to the table, that through these different ways of perceiving what we put here in the center of the discussion, right, can emerge new ways or new perspectives on how to identify and how to tackle the problem that we have here, right? And then we move from this linear way of doing things where we all know the structure, we just need to follow, to one that it's non-linear, that it's one about creativity and innovation, right? Integrating all the parts and creating the synergy among all the ideas that each one of these actors have, and integrating them in a way that is going to be constructive to the challenge that we put here in the center, right?
Yeah, it's just a more networked way of operating, isn't it? Maybe you want to move up a bit. it's trying to move away from a lot of the situations, a lot of ways we find ourselves organizing ourselves across different domains is in these centralized organizations where we find they're kind of recreating the wheel and they're all trying to solve the problem themselves. There's definitely some forms of exchange and collaboration, but it's not systemic. When we look at challenges like homelessness or things like this, we'll find many organizations trying to solve that problem. When we're asking, how do we shift away from that to a more kind of ecosystem networked way, a more collaborative way of working, where we're actually, well, quite often trying to get outside of our boxes, right? Maybe even go to where the problem is, like a living lab or something like this, and bring the different stakeholders together around that and really start to figure out how we can work together to kind of address that issue, because it's holistic. Say homelessness, that homeless person, their challenge is really a multi-dimensional one. How do we bring those different actors from across the system together around that challenge and get them working synergistically in this kind of ecosystem fashion, and learning about that challenge and learning how to work together around that challenge to address it effectively over time. So it will require some kind of platform to support this, but ultimately building that network of actors from across the system to really start to address this challenge in a holistic way, instead of chopping it up and dividing it out into our different boxes and everybody trying to solve it themselves in those organizations. How do we move to this more ecosystem approach?
Exactly. And
so,
yes.
Well, I'll just say we're running out of time, so maybe very quickly I'll touch on this. This is just what we're going to be covering. Well, this is our kind of methodology we'll be looking at next time. Actually, we'll be looking at tools and we'll be working through this. So it's some of what we covered today and what we believe is necessary for really taking a systems innovation approach. We start with kind of framing it, as we talked about on the top left there, systems thinking. On the right there, we go to mapping and trying to find leverage points, and then below, how do we build an ecosystem, bring together the right actors, get them working together, and then ultimately some kind of platform for supporting that, scaling it, that kind of learning engine and getting the value model going and so forth. So that's what we're going to be working on in this series over the next 5 months, exploring this, and more specifically in the next session, we'll be delving into this, the tools and so forth, the canvas.
Yeah, exactly. So for next session, we're going to cover this framework that we have here, and it's going to happen on February 22nd at the same time, and you can access here if you click on the link. And yes, we're going to dive deeper into how the whole learning series is organized, but of course the SI methodology that we have here. And to finish off, this recording is going to be on the SI London Hub YouTube channel. So if you want to re-watch or send it to your friends and colleagues, then you can access that. We're going to post that until the end of this week. And yes, you're welcome to join the SI London Hub to meet like-minded people in London. There are systems changers, systems thinkers in the London, UK in general. And of course, if you're not part yet of the SI community, then you're more than welcome to join us. Just click here on this link, and we're going to see what we are going to do during this learning series. Okay, so thank you very much for being here. It was a pleasure, and hope to see you all in our next session when we're talking about tools on systems innovation.